And welcome to the 100X Entrepreneur Podcast. And today I'm talking with Luke Tomaszewski, who's the founder and CEO of ProxyPics, a company that Luke started to solve a problem that he was getting fed up with himself, which was driving for hours to take appraisal pictures as a real estate appraiser. And Luke very ambitiously designed and launched a two-sided platform where he envisioned connecting real estate professionals with side gig photographers who were local to where the pictures were needed. And the story of ProxyPics that we and my co-author, David Reski, told in our 100X Entrepreneur book involved a lot of obstacles, challenges that were both business, financial, and regulatory. And so I wanted to talk to Luke in hopes that he would enlighten us and share both that experience and some of the lessons he's learned, as well as update the story that we provided in the book. So Luke, let's get everybody on the same page to get started with the story of ProxyPics. Let's start on the extreme growth now end. How is the business going right now? And then if you would take a few minutes to take us back to the beginning and tell us about what you were thinking and why you launched the company. So thank you again for joining us. Let's go.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Mary. The business continues to thrive. We continue to beat, goals that we've had. We exceed, last year's, revenue, order count. We continually see, decreases in turn time. So we're checking all of those boxes. So we're moving, towards the goal that we want to every year. So we have absolutely no complaints there. We continually receive, positive feedback from clients and our proxies in the field. We're checking all of those boxes. So I think we're definitely hitting the goals that we want. We expect the same thing for, next year and the following, but, with continually, growing, at a faster pace, solving more problems. But update for today is, it's business as usual. The team's happy. We're doing everything that we should. So that's how we want it to go. Taking a step, backwards to, when it all started, back in 2016 when we launched the company. Like you mentioned, this idea really popped into my head in probably 2009, 2010. As you said, my background is a real estate appraiser. That's how everything started, where we were doing a lot of, foreclosure type appraisals back in those days. And it was just a lot of driving back and forth. I've always told everybody that, an appraiser's time should be, utilized in a better fashion opposed to spending a couple of hours driving back and forth. And back then it was just an idea and a pain point that, we had within the industry. And, Uber, Lyft, they were starting to become an idea and a bit popular. People were using them. So this crowdsourcing terminology was becoming a new thing. And with that, smartphones were getting a lot smarter. Cameras were getting better. You had GPS, so you could actually locate people. But that's how it all started, just from a, problem that I was trying to solve for myself, really. And it was just the thought, and the thought kept popping back into my head, year after year, until it bothered me enough to let's try to do something with it.
Great. And one thing that struck me, I'll be honest, Luke, and I think I said this to you when we had our very first interview for the 100X book. You were bootstrapping this company out of the savings you had from your previous businesses as a real estate appraiser. And I immediately thought, wow, Uber, they raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and they weren't profitable for a long time. This is a really ambitious undertaking that and indeed you told me about it. So let's tell our listeners, if you would, You had a lot of challenges in those early days, but if you could just like summarize the two biggest challenges that you came up against in the first couple of years and what lessons you learned from that.
So yeah, like you said, looking backwards on it and, the amount of outreach that we get when people find out that we're, fully self-funded with, no private equity or VC, they ask the second a question, they ask that question a second time because they have a hard time believing it. Um, and, like any entrepreneur, you have to be very stubborn, ambitious, all of the above, looking backwards on it. Yes, the fact that we, survived and, got over that hump into, I want to say profitability, but my only goal, in those days was simply stop losing money. Um, Everybody talks about, it'll be great to get to this revenue number. I always tell people, just get me to that zero number where we're not losing money, and I'll be happy and I could sleep a bit better at night. Um, so really those are, the hardest things I think to overcome. And, building a two-sided marketplace, I definitely didn't realize, how hard it would be. Like I might have shared, before the first 3 to 4 years, we were losing money, month over month and bootstrapping it through the appraisal business. And we'd have weeks where we'd have single digit orders and the orders would come in, they wouldn't always get fulfilled. And it was just a tough, you'd have to go week by week and just tell yourself, one day in the future, we'll get over this, we'll accomplish that, let's get to zero and stop losing money. But you really have to have that, stubborn, let's keep going, it'll get better at some point. But it took a good 3, 4 years. So you really have to have that mindset of, yes, it'll be painful for a long time, but you can't look at it in that mindset as that entrepreneur. You have to say, the light is at the end. I just don't know when that end will come, but hopefully you have enough energy and, self-funding in my case to survive to get to that, inflection point.
And tell me a little bit if you would reflect on what you could have done differently or, because there are lots of entrepreneurs who don't have the money to go for 3 or 4 years before it goes even as far as zero and then start profitability. Looking back, do you have any things you learned that you'd like to share with this group of listeners?
Um, so, definitely operationally, again, I have no developer programming background. So I think, in the early days, it would have been great to maybe get, I don't want to say a co-founder, but maybe somebody on that founding team that had that technical expertise. Some of the pain points that I really went through was one, finding somebody to build an MVP version of the, application. And back then it was just simply getting exterior photos of properties. It was very simple, but that was definitely, one of the biggest pain points in the beginning where, somebody that I might talk to, they would share it'll cost this much, take this long. And again, I know nothing about, or at least knew nothing about the development side back then. So you could have told me something that should take a week, it'll take a year, and we'll charge you X. So that was a huge pain point. So, I'm always a firm believer if you're going to start something, you yourself should be an expert in it. So I knew the business application that we had, but the development side was something that was very foreign to me, and that was a big pain point. So that'd be my biggest recommendation would be, as hard as it is, I think to have, co-founders, which I've never had. It's, me and my wife really started the company. You need somebody with that expertise. I think we would have moved a little bit faster, definitely saved, some money on, development that shouldn't have happened with, developers that didn't produce what we needed. So that's the biggest recommendation. In terms of, raising external funds, that would have been, great, would have potentially sped things up. But at the same time, like you mentioned, some of the regulatory hurdles that we had, I don't think it was a bad thing because in our industry where we started on the lending and valuation side, it takes them a very long time. They move at a slow pace to accept, new technologies, move away from, the current processes. So I think if we moved, at a faster pace, maybe we would have gotten to the market a little too fast and it would have caused a problem. So I wouldn't have changed anything in that standpoint. I love the fact that we control our own destiny at this point, but I think definitely get some people on your team that understand things that you don't. That's the biggest takeaway.
Great. Thank you. And next up, because I want to now fast forward into that happy part of your story where you did have multiple breakthroughs all at once. And what really struck me in our first conversations, Luke, was how quickly you utilized AI and the developments in AI to really change the level of service and value that ProxyPics was able to provide. And can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So we've always had, a lot of success on the front end side of the business. What I mean by that is, once we started gaining traction, we'd obtain, new data collectors or proxies at a very quick pace once we got over that hump. So in terms of assigning in our algorithms, we never had a problem there. But what always worried me was that back end potential bottleneck on the quality control side of the house with reviewing the photos, making sure that they're good, all of that. So about 4 years ago, we went down the machine learning side of things where we worked with, third-party machine learning companies that would provide, image recognition. They would look at a photo, classify it as a front of a home, a garage, things like that. Um, I got to learn, how to, train these models, build bounding boxes around, things that I was trying to train. So it was really cool to, understand that. And the goal of that simply was to expedite the review process, where if we're looking at a photo of a garage, the back then machine learning could say, yes, this is a two-car garage, keep moving. Obviously, we did that for a lot more than a garage would be, exterior photos, interior photos to identify appliances within a kitchen, the flooring types, things like that. So what I really wanted to avoid is, having to, continually hire review staff to review these photos because one, it'll be a larger expense on us, but two, it'll delay that process. So even though we could assign quickly and complete those requests, we still have to have human eyeballs looking at those to verify, the photos match with what's in the questionnaire. Fast forward to, AI, the beautiful thing there was fine tuning these models was a lot faster than training a machine learning model from zero. So that's really expedited things where, I'd say about 65 to 70% of our reviews today are fully automated leveraging AI. And something new that we've done through our self-inspection application now, if it's our person in the field or somebody self-inspecting their own home, we have an instant feedback loop leveraging AI now. So if, let's say, if Mary, the data collector, takes the wrong photo, in about a second and a half, you'll get a feedback loop from the AI saying, you either took a great photo or it looks like you took the wrong photo. Please retake it. So we've been able to implement a lot of new cool things with AI these days, and that's just one example.
Thank you. And let's move on from the technology to what we also need to pay a lot of attention to is the business. So, how did the implementation of AI help you to expand your customer base and turn that corner of becoming profitable?
So again, we go back to, the human capital where we don't have to hire as many people because, one person, let's say on an average day, maybe they could review, 100 to 150 assignments. With AI supporting them, they could easily double, triple that capacity. So that's really helped. One thing that, we knew we were solving a problem in the industry, just providing a quicker inspection to our clients. But what was interesting is a lot of our clients, when we were actually able to get our foot in the door, they were happy with the existing vendors. They were happy with, the turn times that they were getting, the quality. What was very interesting, everybody says, get into a business where you can actually solve a problem, which I knew we were going to do, but the clients didn't realize it themselves when we actually started, casting a spotlight on you're getting this today and you're happy with it. once we came into the picture, we really cast that spotlight of, you could be getting this. You could be slicing your turn times in half, less revision requests, things like that. And that's where AI has really been helping us, speed up that process. Because again, we might be able to complete a job in the field in, call it 6 hours, but at a normal inspection company, it might sit in the review queue for another 6 hours. So now, your total turn time is 12 hours. If we're able to delete that, follow up with the 6 hours to a matter of seconds with AI, that slices that turn time in half, and we just continually deliver, better metrics to our clients. So AI is just speeding that process up for us.
And so help us understand that, Luke, by mapping it out to the number of proxies, which is what your gig photographers are called, hence ProxyPics,
Yep.
and the number of customers that you are now serving. How talk about that 100x scalability that's been enabled by the AI.
So, so the proxies continue to grow. We're north of, 200,000, proxies across the US. We opened, the Canadian market up within the last 6 months. So that was a new development for us. Very excited. Every day we're getting anywhere from 150 to 500 new proxies per day at this point with no paid advertising. Really, the reasoning for that is we just treat the proxies in the field very well. We pay them quickly. We pay them the next day. If they run into an issue, during an assignment, they have the ability to actually chat with us, call us, speak to a live person. We are exploring, chat bots at some point. So I think we'll enable that in the near future, but we're testing that, quite drastically. And in terms of clients, we're definitely not seeing, 100 to 500 new clients per day. That would be a, potentially a dream at some point. But a lot of our clients are enterprise clients where the onboarding will take an extended period of time. But once you get these enterprise clients, on board and fully functional, that's where that exponential growth really happens. A great story is, one of our large banking clients, when we came into the picture, again, they were very happy with the existing vendor base, the metrics. And when we came into that picture, it really cast that spotlight on you were happy with this, but you could be seeing this, and that's what they saw. And it really made them think about, how many of those existing vendors they want to keep, what percentage of the business they want to allocate to us. And we're seeing that same story with other clients where, this was good, but this is so much better. We didn't even know we could get this. So that's where that really 100x growth comes in, where we've identified something for those clients that I don't think they initially realized that they could get. And something that keeps us, driving that innovation is, we're happy with what we're seeing today, but I don't think we'll ever be, 100% happy. We have to keep competing against ourselves. We're, in 2025, we're happy with this turn time. But if you look backwards, we're continually making little changes to, reduce that turn time, even if it's by, a couple of hours each year. It drives that innovation and, the stickiness to the clients for us and making the competitors, it'll make it that much harder for them to catch up. So I think we're our biggest competitor at this point.
Wonderful. And spoken, I will say, like a true 100x entrepreneur, that
Thank you.
you are always looking for the next milestone, always looking for the next innovation. And time is your biggest competitor, and you just need to keep shaving that time and turn around to be the vendor that everybody wants to have. So scalability, I think, just 200,000 proxies around the country and now in Canada. You're very much well established now as a national service, which I know was one of those early challenges for
Oh
you.
yeah.
Let's talk about in this context of always something more, something better, continuing to grow. What are you looking forward to? A, changing, adopting, or improving in terms of growth and technology in the year ahead, Luke?
So, it's continuous growth for us, and that'll, be across all lines, if it's revenue, order count, reduction in turn time. Quite often people ask me, what is that goal, that even revenue number that you want to get to? People, ask for business plans, things like that. I'm a very unconventional startup or business because we didn't have that business plan, nor would I ever. It's not in my mindset to create one. One of the reasons for that is every day I think the business will change and evolve. So if I, you know, write a business plan today, I think it'll be irrelevant in a matter of months because you'll continually have to change things. So there is no end number in sight for me. It'll always change. If I tell you that our, revenue goal is this today, once we hit that goal, you have to set the next one. I mean, I'm looking to scale, every possible mountain that we can once we get to the summit of this one. There's absolutely no reason to stop there, I feel. So it applies to everything from revenue to order count to reduction in turn time, things like that. So we're never really planning on slowing it down. And I think that's a bit of that fire for the person, the entrepreneur starting that company. If your goal is to get to a specific number, and then stop, I think you're in the wrong business. You shouldn't be in that driving seat. I'll put it that way. I don't want to call it an unease, but there's no end in sight until there is, but I don't foresee it coming anytime soon for me, at least, or the company.
Well, and that leads us right into my final question, Luke. So thank you. And that question is, what advice would you give to someone who has a company that has grown incrementally and now they really feel revved up thanks to the 100X Entrepreneur Stories of Extreme Growth? I hope we were inspiring a lot of founders and business owners to think bigger and grow faster. And your story is certainly an inspiring one. Now you're saying there's always going to be another mountain to climb. Well, is that your advice? What else would you tell someone who is thinking of their next growth phase and how they can really scale and still live their lives and have some sense of sustainability?
I mean, the very first piece of advice is, any company that you want to start or, get into, it has to be a passion of yours, something that you'll actually enjoy doing. Going back to, the beginning of the interview, if this was something that I started for a pure, revenue, let's make a lot of money. I think after the first, 2 years of losing a boatload of money, I would have said, no way, let's move on to something else. So I think, that number one thing that you have to establish is whatever business you want to start, it's something that you really have a passion for, a big interest, because it'll be hard. It'll be hard for a long time. Everybody, even reading your book, I'm sure they're going to say, oh my God, they were an overnight success. And it's no, you're an overnight success after, years of failures. So you better get comfortable with that. So if you're doing something that you don't, see a passion for or really love, you're not going to survive. So that's number one, is really get into something that you really have that passion for. Um, and everybody's talking about AI, things like that now. But I think if you go back to the basics, everybody's talking about the, trade businesses nowadays. So I don't think you need a, very scalable company to, make a lot of revenue. But I think you really have to look at one, what do you want to do? And it could be, an electrician, plumbing, anything like that. It could be a very successful business. But yes, if you want to get into something that's truly scalable, um, you have to have a lot of automation in play. It shouldn't require, human capital like in the trades, things like that. So, a lot of online businesses, things that, leverage online, crowdsourcing, things like that. That's, I think, are, pure software plays. That's going to be where you could scale very quickly. But again, I don't think that should be the driving decision of what you do. It should be, what is your passion is number one, because if you get involved in something that is not a passion, um, plan on failure. I think being, in your future because you'll call it quits when it does get hard.
Well, that is indeed wisdom. And knowing full well that you did the opposite when
Yeah,
it got hard, you dug in, you said, I'm not going to quit. I'm fully committed to this company. And I know that if I stick to it, I'll be able to turn that corner to scalability. And here you are, you did it. So,
we did.
congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
again, a reminder that the ProxyPics story end to end with a lot more of those details about the strategies that Luke adopted to overcome the challenges all the way along the road, far from an overnight success story. But now looking forward to more good news, I hope, in the year ahead, Luke, and future growth. And clearly, one of the things you said to me that I loved so much in our conversations for the book, you don't want to quit this company. It's about your passion. And that comes through so wonderfully. So thank you for this update, and thanks for sharing your story as a 100X entrepreneur. And I look forward to more good news about you and ProxyPics in the year ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Looking forward to the book. It's always nice to read about, other founders and, the failures, the struggles, and then obviously the success. So I think it'll be a great book and looking forward to the read. Thank you.